Okay, so you sent us some really fascinating material about this technology, ShotSpotter.
Yeah, the one designed to detect gunshots using sound.
Exactly. It uses a network of these acoustic sensors,
Yeah.
right, and algorithms.
To try and pinpoint where potential gunfire is happening, we know it's been used in places like Chicago.
Right. So for you, this deep dive is really about getting into how it works, where it's actually
What the
deployed,
supposed benefits are?
and maybe more importantly, what the concerns are. Because the sources you gave us, they definitely show different sides to the story.
Absolutely. We've got news articles, Chicago Sun-Times, Wired, AP.
And that overview piece, plus stuff from the company itself, sound thinking, and critics like the ACLU. So a good mix.
Yeah, definitely. So where should we start? Maybe just the basics. How does it work?
Good idea. So at its core, you have these sensors placed around an area.
Acoustic sensors, yeah. They're listening for loud, impulsive sounds
And when they pick something up that might fit the bill, algorithms analyze it.
to see if it sounds like a gunshot and if multiple sensors hear it.
They use the time difference, right? Triangulation?
Exactly. Triangulation to estimate a location. And then an alert goes out to law enforcement.
Okay. Sounds straightforward enough. But the company, Sound Thinking, they put out some pretty high numbers for accuracy.
They do. Their marketing material mentions like a 97% aggregate accuracy rate over 2 years.
97%. That sounds incredibly effective.
It does, but then you look at some of the other sources you sent, like the MacArthur Justice Center study in Chicago.
Ah, right. What did they find?
Well, they looked at 2 years of data and found that 89% of the time, when police responded to a ShotSpotter alert,
89%.
they found no evidence of any gun-related crime.
Wow. Okay, so that's a massive difference from 97% accuracy.
A huge difference. And similar doubts popped up in reports from Knock LA and the Houston Chronicle, too.
So there's this real tension between the company's claims and what some independent analyses are finding on the ground.
Definitely. It makes you wonder, how are they defining accuracy? Is it just detecting a bang versus confirming an actual shooting incident?
Good question. And what about where they put these sensors? How is that decided?
Well, Sound Thinking says they use historical gun violence data provided by the police.
Okay, so the idea is to target areas with more recorded gun violence.
That's the stated rationale, yeah. Tom Chittum, he is a senior VP at Sound Thinking. He says the goal is to focus on these disproportionately impacted areas.
And he specifically says race isn't a factor.
He does. He says race doesn't inform the decisions, and they get permission from property owners to install them, sometimes offering gift cards.
Okay, targeting based on police data, but then there's the secrecy aspect.
Right. They're really tight-lipped about the exact locations.
They don't even tell their police clients the precise spots.
Nope, not since 2019, apparently. They argue it's for security, protecting the sensors and the people who agree to host them. They even fight subpoenas over it.
Hmm. But Wired managed to get some leaked data, didn't they?
They did. And it revealed this huge network, over 25,000 microphones globally.
25,000. Wow.
And Wired actually went out and verified some locations in places like Pasadena and Newburgh using the leaked info and things like Google Street View.
So despite the secrecy, the locations aren't entirely unknown.
Not entirely, no. And that Wired data gives us a sense of the scale. We're talking over 12 million people in the U.S. living in neighborhoods with at least one sensor,
12 million.
across 84 metro areas, 34 states and territories, and some cities are just blanketed. Chicago, D.C., San Juan, over 500 sensors each.
That's a lot of listening devices.
It is, but here's where it gets really interesting connecting it to demographics.
Okay.
Wired's analysis found that nearly 70% of people in these sensor-covered neighborhoods identify as Black or Latino.
70%.
And almost three-quarters of these neighborhoods are majority non-white, with average incomes around $50,000.
So significantly different from the overall demographics in many cities.
Exactly. They gave examples like Winston-Salem, Fort Myers, where the racial makeup of the sensor zones is way different from the city as a whole.
So even if the intent isn't based on race, the outcome seems to be a disproportionate deployment in communities of color.
That's what the data strongly suggests. And this ties directly into how we think about classification systems of race, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, the technology is deployed based on crime data, but if that data itself reflects historical biases or focuses policing on certain areas,
then the technology placement reinforces that pattern, potentially layering surveillance heavily onto specific racial groups.
Precisely, which leads directly into the concerns raised by residents in places like Chicago.
Yeah, the sources mentioned worries about over-policing in black neighborhoods.
And the low accuracy we talked about. Residents feel it leads to unnecessary police showing up, sometimes with hostility.
It changes the whole feel of the neighborhood, that constant potential for police intervention based on a sensor alert.
And the ACLU, one of your sources, they have clearly outlined major problems they see with it impacting civil liberties.
They're pretty critical.
Very. And these concerns about accuracy and over-policing, they aren't just abstract. There are specific incidents.
Like the fireworks incident in Chicago you mentioned in the sources. That one was really concerned.
Tell us about that one.
Okay, so it was late, like 11 p.m. back in January. Police get a ShotSpotter alert.
Right.
Body cam shows them going into a backyard. They see a young person. Then there's a loud bang.
A firework.
Yes, apparently a firework. But an officer fires their weapon almost immediately.
Oh, wow.
And you can hear the kid they estimated, maybe 14 or 15, yelling, "No, it's just fireworks."
Was anyone hit?
Thankfully, no. But the aftermath. The police statements were all over the place.
How so?
Initially, CPD said officers were fired upon by a man. Later, they changed it to seeing flashes of light.
But they kept calling him a man even though officers on scene thought he was a teen?
Yeah, and their report claimed he attacked them, posed a threat, fled. But the Accountability Office, COPA, looked at the body cam.
Yeah.
And COPA said none of that was visible. They confirmed no gun was used against the officers, and it was fireworks.
That's deeply disturbing. It really puts a spotlight on human agency, the kid's simple act of lighting fireworks being instantly misinterpreted through the lens of that alert.
Leading to potentially lethal force.
Yeah.
It highlights the potential harms very clearly.
Absolutely. And it's not just about misinterpreting sounds. The sensors themselves might not even be working reliably.
Ah, the Wired leak mentioned that too.
Yeah, about 1 in 10 sensors globally were flagged as broken, unreliable, or just out of service.
1 in 10, that's a lot.
In Chicago alone, that could mean up to like 357 sensors potentially offline.
And there was that Southside Weekly report.
Right, about a shooting with 55 rounds fired where ShotSpotter didn't alert because the sensors in that area were down.
So the system isn't always reliable, even for its main job. These sensors are material artifacts that are literally failing.
And the alerts they do generate become these digital artifacts whose meaning and reliability are seriously questioned.
Adding to that, there was that internal report from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office
Yeah, what did that find?
that nearly a third of arrests that started with a ShotSpotter alert in Chicago
A third?
had nothing to do with a gun.
Wow. So people are getting arrested for other things after police show up for a potential gunshot.
Seems like it. Chris Baumol from EPAC, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, pointed this out.
And EPIC actually asked the DOJ to investigate, right?
Yeah, for potential Civil Rights Act violations. Their argument is basically that ShotSpotter directs police to over-police minority areas.
Baumol said it primes police to go into minority communities believing that shots are fired.
And that leads to arrests for, outstanding warrants, misdemeanors, things totally unrelated to the initial alert.
Which ties right back to power dynamics. Who gets surveilled, who gets stopped, and how technology might amplify existing biases linked to those classification systems of race.
Now, SoundThinking's guy, Tom Chittum, he pushes back on this.
What's his perspective?
He argues the system gives accurate data for safe community engagement, allows police to check on people.
Okay.
And he kind of dismisses the idea that police roll up, ready to make arrests, as just speculation based on a few incidents. Says ShotSpotter's just a tool, it depends how police use it.
But that Cincinnati example challenges that idea of safe engagement, doesn't it?
Remind me of that one.
Officers respond to an alert, 2 loud sounds. They find a guy nearby.
Okay.
They detain him, search him, no gun, but then they run his ID.
And find outstanding traffic warrants.
Exactly. So he gets arrested. The ShotSpotter alert with no gun found still led directly to his arrest for something totally different.
That really questions the just a tool argument.
Yeah.
It shows how the technological affordances, its ability to trigger a response, can lead to outcomes beyond its stated purpose, impacting someone's human agency and freedom.
Absolutely. And it brings up these bigger systemic questions, too.
Like the black box issue.
Yeah, the algorithm itself. How exactly does it decide gunshot versus firework or backfire? We don't fully know. It's not transparent.
Which makes it hard to really assess for bias or error.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And while your sources don't use these specific academic terms, you can think about the impact it has.
Like persuasive architecture.
Yeah.
Or disciplinary architecture.
Sort of, yeah. How does having this network of sensors constantly listening, especially in specific neighborhoods, shape how people behave? How does it discipline movement or activity? Does it subtly coerce certain actions?
And it changes how police operate, too. It's that mutual shaping perspective, right?
Yeah.
The tech shapes policing, and policing experiences shape how the tech is viewed and used.
Exactly. It's a two-way street. And we have to remember all the stakeholders here.
Right, the city of Chicago paying for it, sound thinking providing it.
The residents living under it, especially in those heavily censored areas, the police using it, civil liberties groups watching it, and the individuals directly impacted,
Yeah.
like that boy with the fireworks. Each with different interests, different levels of power, and different potential harms or benefits.
And speaking of Chicago, there's that huge recent development.
Oh yeah, the big news.
Mayor Brandon Johnson announced back in February that the city is not renewing its contract with sound thinking.
A major decision.
And one of your sources even confirms that crews have actually started taking the sensors down in Chicago.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they're really moving forward with phasing it out.
Seems so. So wrapping up this deep dive, it's definitely complex.
Totally. You've got the promise, rapid alerts for potential shootings versus these really serious concerns. Accuracy, bias, negative police interactions.
The sources you sent lay out those tensions really well.
So as you think about all this, what does it really mean for communities? For safety versus surveillance?
Yeah. How do we even evaluate tools like this fairly? Considering effectiveness, but also equity and the potential for harms.
And what does it say about technology intersecting with these deep-seated issues around classification systems of race and existing power structures?
It's a lot to think about.
Definitely. And with Chicago pulling out, you have to wonder, what's next? For ShotSpotter, for similar tech in other cities, will this debate change, or will we keep grappling with these same fundamental questions about accuracy, equity, and who ultimately benefits and who might be harmed? It really forces you to consider all the stakeholders again.